Okay, so this is going to be kind of a disorganized video, but I thought I'd record myself doing a few Illustrator tasks because, without anything in here, just so you can kind of learn the program. It seems like a steep learning curve, but it's just like anything. Once you use it a while, it starts to just kind of feel like second nature. Um, I've written up a document, which is my need to know Illustrator hotkeys. And I say need to know because I need to know them. To be efficient at making maps, I usually have my subcontractors and people that work with me make sure that they kind of know at least these so that they're efficient and not fishing for tools all the time and not chasing things. There's also a couple other things that are just nice to know, but I don't think they're quite as critical. So I'm going to just kind of go through this list and a couple other things by Illustrator, and hopefully it'll be helpful. So the first thing to do is we're going to start with just general motion here, and then we'll kind of get down to these tools as we go. So Illustrator is a vector-based program that you can bring in raster data, but in the world of Adobe, Photoshop was kind of their big program for dealing with rasters or any kind of pixel-based thing. And Illustrator is their program that deals with vector art. And so even though we use raster stuff in Illustrator, it's really for compiling layers of vector data. So I'll just start with how to move around. I actually don't ever use there's like a bunch of pan and zoom tools where you can go and grab the hand and drag yourself around the workspace, and you can use the zoom tool to kind of like zoom in and out. I find it to be pretty inefficient to work that way. I like to have my hands kind of directly move the screen without needing a tool. Excuse me. So I almost always have one of these selection tools on all the time, and Control and the mouse wheel will kind of pan you left and right. Just the mouse wheel alone will tilt you up and down. Alt and the mouse wheel will zoom you in and out. And if you do shift with different combinations of that, it'll go faster, or slower and things like that. So I find it really helpful. If you don't have a mouse wheel, the trackpad is similarly, I think the trackpad does the same thing. And if you're on a Mac, I'm pretty sure that Alt does the same thing that Option does, and Control does the same thing that the command symbol does. So try those out if you want to get these motion tools down. So Illustrator is it's based on objects, and so probably the most important layer, the most important window is this layers window, and it starts with a default of just one layer. And if you go down here, you can add layers. And so the template I gave you was a bunch of layers that were added. You can create sub-layers. You can create as many sub-layers as you want. I tend to only try to have my documents have, I think I said, 3 levels of hierarchy, so that the objects are in the bottommost layer or above that. And the reason you use layers is so that you can more efficiently make selections, right? You might have a bunch of different types of roads, for instance, and maybe they all have a different symbol or symbology. But then there's times when you want to select all of the roads, and so that this layer enables you to make a big selection between them all. So let's just make an object. Let's pretend that this is, circles and squares. So I'm going to draw a square here, this rectangle tool. M is the hotkey for that. And, I can just I just click and drag and extent. If I hold Shift down, it forces me to maintain that aspect ratio. So it's making me do a square. If I hold the Alt key down, it will build it from the center, or the centroid. So, if I was making a point of interest on a map, and I really wanted to be exact about it, I might want to actually use that Alt and then hold the Shift key, and that will make an even square or circle on top of the spot I want. But in general, you start making symbols anyway, so you would just kind of click and drag the symbols. Every object in Illustrator has a fill and a stroke, and the fill right now is white by default, and the stroke is just this kind of black stroke. And the strokes, I think by default, let me go to our strokes tab over here and look at it, are aligned on the center of this wireframe. So this wireframe is telling us what what are the boundaries of the object that we're looking at. And if we use our selection tool, we can like manipulate that wireframe to change the object. But the stroke by default is directly aligned to the center of the wireframe. We could change that so that it's on the inside, and you might do this with like park boundaries. There's a whole bunch of reasons you might do that. To the outside. So anyway, and then it's there's different types of corners you can get. You can get a bevel where it does that, or a round. If you have a line like this, I just used the hotkey, the pipeline tool or the slash tool to get the line. So I'm going to draw a line now, and the cap for the line can be flat like that, or butt cap. It can be round, or it can be projecting. And so there's different things you can do there. With roads, for instance, I tend to always have a soft corner and a round cap. Usually projecting looks pretty bad, but there's different reasons you might do different versions of these things. And you can play around with this. You can dash the line and all that kind of stuff. So let's go back to our square. Instead of going up right now, see how if I was just starting using Illustrator, I might go up and try to just grab my selection tool. But I know that V is the key on my keyboard that gets my selection tool. So I'm just going to grab that because I know that's what it is. I want to show you a few more windows. So, and I think in one of my other videos I said this, that there's kind of windows, and these are kind of what you can do to the objects, like the different attributes and actions you can do to the objects. And these are the tools, and these are how you kind of manipulate the objects themselves. So the most important ones are probably the color tab, and this allows you to change the color of the fill or the stroke. And depending on what color space you're in, you can set your color space up here, whether it's RGB or CMYK. You can the default will put you on a different color kind of dialog. So I think if you don't know this already, you can look this up on some of the other videos, but CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and that is how most printers work. So there's those 4 pigments that get mixed together to make all the colors. It's called subtractive color mixing. And then RGB is red, green, blue, and those are, every pixel is a mixture of those 3 types of light. So that's additive color mixing, and you can watch the video about that. But for print material, we usually do CMYK, and for screens we do RGB. If you find it confusing to work in CMYK, let's pretend we're going to just make this a square that has some color to it here. It can be confusing to try to learn CMYK. One of the nice things you can do, I like this about CMYK, is that if you get your level set to what you want, you add and mix the different colors. If you shift click these, you can create kind of a whole bunch of different tints. And tints are kind of important when you do more and more layers, because I think I mentioned in one of my videos that it was really easy to add transparency to, or kind of make something more transparent to back it off or diminish it. If you have too many transparency settings, though, it becomes harder and harder to reliably export and share your visual. It might look different depending on how you export it. Most printers don't really like it when you submit things with transparency. So learning how to diminish things using tints is kind of really helpful, because that means that it'll be full value. So shift click that to kind of get your tints set. Hue, saturation, and brightness it tends to be how I do my rough cut. So when I design things, the saturation, I think you can watch the video about this as well, is from kind of fully desaturated grayscale to full color, and then the hue is a radial 360 through 180 at cyan and back to red at 360, so 0 to 360, and this color wheel is kind of universal. So a lot of these color values are, if not exactly the same, they're similar in most programs. Brightness has to do with if it's completely desaturated, how far from black to white are you? So you might think, well, how do I get brown, right? Well, brown is really a desaturated dark orange, and that's kind of, at least once you start to learn this system, I find this to be the easiest way to design color. Once you make your map something you want to export and share, you do kind of need to pay attention to your color system if you're in CMYK or RGB. This is telling me right now that this is not going to play very nicely with web color. So, if I was to upload my map with this color, a website might have a hard time finding the color that I want to show. So you can use those things to help you correct your colors so that they'll either show up in print or show up on the web, and it'll be WYSIWYG, as we say, which is what you see is what you get. So anyway, let's say I've got my brown square and I'm happy with it. The next tool, I think I'm scattered here. So I showed you that window, the color tool. You can also use this for tints here if you don't want to do the drag thing with CMYK. And I showed you the stroke. The transparency is good to do. You can play with that. We'll talk about the appearance tab a little bit. The layer panel. I think those are the big ones, and the other ones we'll get there. So, okay, I think that's pretty good. The next tool I wanted us to look at is Alt selection tool and drag. And so what that is a lot of times, at least with text, let's say we have a very particular text object that we, here's a label. Let's have a label called Damariscotta River. And, we've styled it exactly how we want individually. And, we've got, it's italic, and, maybe it's on a bend, right? So I'm going to go like this, actually. It's on a bend like that. Damariscotta River. And I want a bunch of curved labels for a bunch of different rivers. What I might do is I might create one style. So I just took my eyedropper and I'm going to sample that so it's the same color. And so now I want a bunch of these curved text objects. What you can do when you have this selection tool highlighted is if you hit Alt or Option, you'll see it makes that duplication symbol down there, right? And so what's nice about that is that in the actual layer, let's go back here, Damariscotta River, here's my labels layer, right? Maybe here's my squares layer. If I want more of these objects, I can just Alt-click drag them like that, and I'm going to get the exact object, and that allows me, and it copies them in the exact same layer. So that's kind of a nice way to, if you want to do some manual labeling, which we still have to do from time to time, it makes it easier and faster to do that. And so anyway, we'll talk about some of that later, but Alt drag is a good one to know. Some of these others should be pretty understandable. T for pulling up the text. I for the eyedropper tool. I just showed you the eyedropper tool, right? And so I'm going to do that again. Let's say we want it to be brown. I do that, and of course, what did it do? It grabbed the whole appearance. It didn't just make it brown. It made it brown with a black stroke that was rounded and exactly the same width as that. So the eyedropper is a useful tool because it allows you to sample styles from other objects. But it's going to pull everything usually, so you got to be careful how you use it. But eyedropper tool is great. Let's see. I think we should do some of these tools because they're useful. The pen tool is one that I used to use a lot. I think it's still good. It's not overrated, but it's kind of hard to digitize with. Let's say we were digitizing a road and there was a really long straight section. We might use this to create kind of make it like that, and then we get to a place in the road and we want there to be a nice even curve, right? The pen tool does a couple of nice things. It lets us click and drag so that the wireframe, we can decide kind of how we want that curve to go. And it's almost like lofting. It gives us a nice bend. Of course, I got the fill in there, so I'm just going to get rid of that fill. But so what it does is it just kind of gives us some nice curves. And if you don't click and drag, eventually you can go back and make it nice and harsh again. So you know, I could try to describe these tools forever, but you kind of have to just play with them a little bit. So pen tool is good for vertice to vertice types of digitizing, and it's very kind of exacting. And you know, if you're, I'm going to hit escape, which is going to get rid of my current vertex that I want to get to. If you want to add points back in, you can kind of see how there's this star. The star in the pen tool means it's going to create something. It turns into a plus right there. That means it wants me to add a vertex, right? If it has a slash, it means I'm going to continue that path. And if it makes a circle, it means that I'm going to close that path and turn this whole thing into kind of one big object. So the pen tool is useful. I mean, I still use it a bunch, but I don't recommend it as much for digitizing as I used to. So what else can we do? The direct selection tool is really useful. So the regular selection tool, now that we have this object, if I just click it, it's going to make me drag this whole object. The direct selection tool allows me to select parts of an object. So I can click and drag. If I click once and then click again, oopsie, boom, boom. That's not letting me do it. But I can click these vertices and move them, and that's something only the direct selection tool lets me do, where I can grab part of a line. So the direct selection tool lets you directly select certain parts of things and kind of move them around. The free transform tool or selection tool is for, usually it's for the whole object. Moving down the list here. So yeah, direct selection tool. Actually, this is really important. The control, just control alone. What I like about that is that it toggles. So I'm hitting control right now, and it toggles between your last two tools. And so I find that useful, like if I am using the eyedropper tool, right? Let's say I want to change the square to that color, and I hit I. I'm going to use my eyedropper tool, go like that, and then I want to keep my eyedropper tool because I also want to turn this shape that color, but I want to move this one first, right? So I can just use control, and it's just toggling it. I don't know if you can see that, and I can move that. Then I let go. I'm going to sample. I'm going to click this one, and I'm going to sample that one, and so on. So like, you know, just learning about some of those basic selection things you can do. I just did a control alt drag, right? You just get a lot more kind of mobility in the software. Yeah, selection tools. As you see, I'm squirming a little bit because I don't even really think about these anymore. And so it makes it hard to teach them. The pencil tool, that one's actually one of my new favorites that I use quite a bit. The pencil tool seems really inefficient. It's N on your keyboard because you have to actually use your mouse. And so you draw, and like if your hand isn't steady, it might seem like really, let's just make this a line here. And so when I use the pencil tool, I might feel like, oh, well, I'm not going to be exact, and so it's really wavery and bad. But what's cool about it is that it lets you reshape things. So like, you know, like if you have a stream that's really, let's say you have a stream data set that's really wonky. You know, maybe or it's a GPS of a trail and it just looks like this. What the pencil tool lets you do is reshape things how you want. So when that star, which means create new feature, goes away, you're now editing that object alone. So that would mean that so long as I come back to the object, it will let me draw and reshape it so that the object will be smoother or more attractive, or you can just completely edit it to look better. And so I've been finding more and more that when I'm trying to make maps look a little bit more attractive, this pencil tool comes in handy. I mean, just like the pen tool, you can, you know, the slash means you're going to continue a path, and the circle means you're going to complete a path and turn it into an object. So that's a nice one to use as well. Okay. I think I'm just going to show you a few more and then let you ask questions because, you know, it's kind of like trying to teach somebody to use a hammer. You're going to have to whack your thumb a bit, I guess. Yeah. The blob brush tool and eraser tools are interesting. Shift B, blob brush. And what that does is it just creates, it seems like it's a paintbrush, but it actually creates an object. It creates a polygon object. But it's nice because you know, you can kind of, if you're trying to get a fill for like vegetation or water, it's not a bad way to edit that, or wetlands or something. Shift E is an eraser, which lets you cut that as you need. So a lot of times if I have, you know, again, let's say it's a really messy file that I get from a GIS data set and it comes in and I want to clean it up a bit, sometimes I'll use the eraser to make a cleaner edge or something like that. You know, there's 100 different uses for each of these tools, but you'll learn them. Yeah, I think in one of my videos I talked about select same stroke color, select same fill color. I think this is pretty critical for cartography, at least if you don't have the map publisher plugin, which is a little expensive for the little guys. If you're just going to use Illustrator like we are, where it's just a graphics program that you layer things into, then building Illustrator files is always going to be a little bit of an inefficient workflow, but it's what you have to do. And so being able to select by same fill color and same stroke color is pretty important. So, you know, if this was an SVG file, I could now go select same fill, and it grabs all of these guys that are the same color. And you might think, well, why didn't it grab this one? And that's because that is a stroke color, not a fill color. And I think a lot of this should be kind of self-explanatory. So I'm going to give you this sheet, and I'm going to be at my office hours. So if you have some Illustrator grief, let's chat about it on Zoom. Okay, best of luck.